Damo, it is less than 2 weeks until our brand new event, the Wellness Base Camp, hits Adelaide.
Oh, I can't wait, MP.
Oh, Damo, we can't wait to have you in Adelaide. The Brisbane Base Camp was a sellout. The feedback from attendees was inspiring.
Christine said, keep up the incredible work and energy. You make me feel so good.
And Kira said, I loved all the speakers and the vibe in the room. So many aha moments.
And Lauren said, no matter how many times I hear each of these people speak, I learn new things always and have action steps to take away.
Can't wait to have you there, great man. The rock star of wellness is joining Kim Morrison, JP and Andy from Smashed Avocado, Brett Hill and myself at the Wellness Base Camp Saturday, April 7th at the Arca Bar in Adelaide.
2-for-1 tickets available with the code COUNTDOWN at www.thewellnessbasecamp.com on Eventbrite or search for The Wellness Base Camp Adelaide on Facebook.
That code again is COUNTDOWN with tickets available at thewellnessbasecamp.com on Eventbrite or by typing The Wellness Base Camp Adelaide in Facebook.
TheWellnessCouch.com, streaming wellness into your lives.
Welcome to Nourishing the Mother, featuring your hosts Bridget Wood and Julie Tenner.
Hello and welcome to Nourishing the Mother. I'm Bridget Wood.
And I'm Julie Tenner. And today we have the delicious and divine, that's what I was going for, Bree Downes, who was my doula and birth photographer and also Bridget's birth photographer. And we have her here to really, talk about some really juicy stuff when it comes to birth and women and bodies and our voices and power within that, and certainly her own personal journey of that over 3 children. So before we jump into that, I'd just love to remind you to jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au and on the homepage sign up to join our tribe, where once a week we send you an email with everything we've put out in the world so you can click away at where you'd love to dive deeper. And then occasionally we send you a second email that would be like a conversation Bridget and I would have between each other. So come join our tribe and jump onto nourishingthemother.com.au.
Welcome, Bree.
Hi. We've called this podcast The Secret to a Good Birth. Before we dive into your story, which is really where Bridge and I are really excited to hear the wisdom, what does that mean, a good birth, for you, being a doula of so many years?
It's such an onion, that question, because there's so many layers, and I think it's such a personal thing, because define good, right? What's one person's version of good is that the baby is alive and the mother is alive and they get to take a baby home. Yet for another woman, a good birth is completely intervention-free, at home, with no care providers, completely empowered, doing it all on her own, not being dictated by anyone else's policies or procedures. And then for another woman, it could be that a good birth is that the baby came out of her vagina and she didn't have a cesarean. So I think everyone needs to have a think about, well, what is my version of good? And also, too, that kind of leads into your expectations, because people will, women will judge their birth based on versus their expectation going in. So if they have high expectations for birth and they don't fulfill on that, then there's the potential for disappointment or trauma, grief, feeling let down in yourself or let down with your body or let down with the system. Yet if you go in with low expectations, then you've kind of got nothing to, I guess, compare or measure yourself against. And I'm certainly not saying don't have any expectations. That's not the point of me saying that. But I think check in, what are your expectations for birth and where do those expectations come from? Do they come from the stories you've heard? Do they come from movies you've seen? Your own birth story or journey that you may have heard your mother telling you growing up? The random woman, stopping you in the street, telling you her traumatic birth that has never been healed properly. Your expectations of birth are going to come from what you've been exposed to. about birth from a very young age. So that's always, a really, really good thought process, and even dialogue with your partner or a friend to open up and have is, well, what are my beliefs around birth and how do my beliefs create my expectations of my own experience?
What did that look like for you with your own birth experiences with each of your children? What was your expectations of birth?
That's interesting, and I can see really clearly how they were different every time. I think that first I was that classic naive mother going in the first time. My body had never failed me before. I'd never been really sick before. I'd never been in hospital before. I wouldn't say I was the fittest, healthiest person in the world, but, I felt good in my body. I felt strong. I felt capable. I felt like there was no reason I wouldn't give birth. My body and my lifestyle had never given me any reason to doubt birth, and I think I must have always had a fairly positive thought process around birth because there wasn't a lot I was scared of. There wasn't anything that I was really fearful of. I certainly wasn't scared of the pain like I know some women can feel. Probably the thing for me was being scared of tearing, and I can relate that back to, I remember my mum saying when I was little about my brother who was born after me was that he tore her from arsehole to breakfast.
God,
So
it really makes me cringe even hearing it.
yeah, so that really stuck with me. So I would
That's so
say
interesting. Those comments we think are flippant. We have no idea the ripples they actually have in those children.
yeah.
The beliefs we pick up and carry for a lifetime.
And words have such power.
Well, I just remember being confused by that. I remember not really understanding what that meant, but I knew that it didn't sound very nice.
It didn't sound like something you really wanted.
But even if you don't understand on a head level, on a body level, I think you would understand that. And on a body level, you've taken that in, like you've sucked that into your body as a belief.
Yeah.
Like unconsciously.
Yep. Yep, I agree.
And expectations with number two?
Expectations with number two was that because I'd changed my care setting and changed the external things around me, that I would have a different result.
And expectations with number three?
With number three, I handed over. I had no expectations. I expected that I was going to be fulfilled no matter what happened because I'd done the work.
So now that we've related that back to your conversation around expectations, can you actually walk us through who you were as the woman beginning your birth journey for each of your babies? And I guess what you consider to be your summary of your birth stories, because it's a pretty extraordinary story.
Yeah. It is an amazing story. I always think of my daughter's birth, who's my third child. I always think of her birth as my magnum opus. I feel like it's her birth and the journey I went on around her birth has been the making of me as a woman. And it's dictated what I'm doing now in my life with work in terms of supporting other women and the faith and belief and trust that I have in what's possible when you really want something and when you really surrender and go deep into wherever you need to go to achieve that.
What does that mean exactly?
Well, I guess for me, and I suppose it will make more sense as I tell my story.
Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt you. Just tell your story.
So my first son was unplanned and a lovely surprise, and I was so ready to be a mum. I was 28 and I loved being pregnant. I felt like a goddess. I loved my body. I loved not having to suck in my stomach, and I felt feminine, and it was the first time I really enjoyed being in my body, to be honest. I grew up with a mum who is really she's a natural healthcare practitioner, so I've always definitely been more on the side of alternative therapies and, natural where possible. So it was kind of a no-brainer for me that, I was very much passionate about wanting a natural birth, didn't want any pain relief, didn't want, anything that wasn't natural in me or in my baby, basically, and wanted to be very much just left alone and supported for that process to occur. I did consider having a home birth. I think at the time, though, I felt like it was too much money and that we were also renting, and I felt weird about having a baby in someone else's home. And so I thought the next best thing for me was to book into the Mercy Birth Centre, which unfortunately no longer really exists. And that's where I had the care for my pregnancy. And I didn't have, my pregnancy was great. There was nothing unusual. It was unremarkable. And then until I went overdue. And there was always a debate around my dates anyhow, but, they had me due 4 days before the due date that I had based on my last menstrual period. So they kept saying the whole way along, oh, it doesn't matter. And then, of course, when I got to 40 weeks, I had an appointment that day and they wanted to have a conversation about booking an induction. And I said, well, I'm not even really, according to me, I'm not even really overdue yet. And just the pressure that all of a sudden, it was like once this magical day arrived, all this pressure was put on me. And it was the first time in my whole pregnancy where I suddenly felt stressed and anxious. And I knew that if I went more than 10 days overdue, that I wouldn't be able to birth in the birth centre, that I would have to go to delivery suite, which I didn't want to do because I didn't believe that a natural birth was possible in that setting. So I was very much attached to I have to birth in the birth centre or I won't get a natural birth. So at I think 41 weeks, I was back in again and they were wanting to schedule an induction for me at 40 plus 10, which was 3 days later. And I didn't want to. I didn't feel, there was no part of my body or being that wanted to be induced or have this journey tampered with. Yet I went home and did all the natural things to try and get myself into labour. I did acupuncture and we had sex and I ate lots of chili. I think we went to Ying Tai on Victoria Street, and then ended up taking castor oil without really even consulting anyone or even doing a Google search on it. I just, someone had said to me, castor oil will put you into labour. And I thought, oh yeah, castor oil, that's fairly natural. That's fine.
Can I just segue for 1 second?
Sure.
What are your thoughts on that?
Now?
What are your thoughts on that? Because I think there's often a contentious debate around, well, if it's natural, then it's not really induction and tampering with the system.
Well, I don't agree with that now. Yeah. I think an induction is an induction. Whether it's natural or whether it's medicalised, you're asking your body and your baby to do something it's clearly not ready to do for whatever reason.
Okay, continue with your story.
So what unfolded for me was that night my waters broke in bed and I had no contractions. And I've since heard that that's quite common with taking castor oil. It upsets your stomach to the point where it aggravates things, but sometimes so it'll aggravate things to the point of starting something but not enough if your body...
To initiate it properly.
Yeah. So to cut a really long birth short, I ended up labouring for 64 hours with very little contractions and managing to get to 2 centimetres. Wow. And that was after I'd been put on the drip and ended up having an epidural as well for 10 hours. Still no further dilation.
How hard was that for you to have a drip and have an epidural? Or not hard, I shouldn't say that. What was that like for you?
It was hard. I don't even know how to describe the feeling of feeling forced to do something to your body that you don't want to do. I didn't I pushed back as much as I could against the hospital to the point where they were threatening to send me somewhere else because they didn't know how to deal with me. Their policy on waters breaking is 24 hours, and I pushed them out to over 50 before I let them intervene or agreed. But it was, the pressure was a lot. I felt railroaded, and I feel like it broke me in terms of I didn't come out of that birth with very much confidence left. And I'm a fairly confident kind of person, so for me to have my confidence rattled is fairly significant. So after basically trying everything and them coming to me and saying, you're still 2 centimetres and baby's starting to show signs of tiredness and all we've got left to offer you now is a cesarean. And I remember the moment so clearly, and I remember laughing, but I didn't feel like laughing. I wanted to scream and I wanted to cry. But for some reason, laughter came out of me because I just felt like, there's nothing else I could have given. There was nothing else I could have, I felt like I'd pushed back against the system as much as I could to get what I wanted, and it didn't make any difference. So we had a cesarean, and I think the only thing in my head that made it okay was that I was damn ready to meet my baby and hold my baby. And I just got to the point where I'm like, you know what? I don't care now. I just want my baby in my arms. And then I wasn't allowed to have my baby in theatre. And I was so naive in pregnancy that I wouldn't be having a cesarean that I didn't even bother to do any research around what it's like to have a Caesar, what it involves, what are my options, what may or may not happen, who stays with me, who stays with the baby. So I wasn't even aware that the baby couldn't be put on my chest. I wasn't aware that I couldn't have delayed cord clamping. I wasn't aware that my baby could potentially be removed from me and I wouldn't see my baby for an hour. And that golden hour and that bonding and that breastfeeding would also be taken from me. And that, for me, was almost the cherry on the cake, I think, after having laboured for that long and feeling like I had to accept all of those interventions that I deeply didn't want, to then have my baby taken away from me. I just felt empty, and I just felt like a product. I didn't feel like a person. And I reckon it took me a good, I deeply, deeply fell in love with my son, and I remember finding early parenting really easy, actually, other than the breastfeeding. That was a bit of a struggle for a while, but that first 6 months was just so delightful, getting to know him and bonding with him. But within myself as a woman, I'd been rocked to my core in terms of what I felt like. Like I said, all my confidence was gone. I felt really shaken. And then thanks to my beautiful doula who I had with me through that birth, she helped me process a lot, and we had many, many conversations around why it might have happened and what I could do differently next time, and started to think about...
What's the gold you took out of those conversations?
I think for me it was just being able to be at peace with what had happened and being able to move on.
How do you do that?
For me, it was actually educating myself. So in that 6 months, I was very disheartened by. I was upset with myself that I went in so naive. I think I approached birth like it was a checklist, like you do all the right things and you tick all the right boxes and you get what you want. And because that is not the case, and I found out the hard way, that's what really threw me. So I think I just, because I had that kind of mentorship with my doula, I started reading a lot and started talking to other women about their birth stories, and it was like a light was being switched on in my head. And I remember it was around 6 months after I had my son that I stopped beating myself up, and I stopped feeling like my body had failed me, and I stopped wondering why I couldn't give birth, and I started to see the flip side and see that it was the system. And it was the sausage factory that failed me. It wasn't my body. It was because it was the pressure of that induction, because I went and took castor oil, because I didn't want a medical induction. And so my focus very much flipped from me being broken to the system was broken. And then I just got angry.
And what happens after you get angry?
Well, then I made some very different decisions for my second birth. So I had a bit of a knee-jerk reaction to the system and my first birth, and I thought, no, this time I'm having a home birth, and no one's going to put any pressure or policy on me. No one's going to tell me how overdue I can or can't go. No one's going to tell me when my baby's coming except for my baby. And I'm going to have a birth pool, and I'm going to have fairy lights, and I'm going to have an independent midwife who doesn't want to do vaginal exams and isn't going to put any limitations on me. And I think I very much focused on the external part of my birth. I didn't do any internal work. I just thought if I change my birth setting, change my care provider, that surely that's enough to make a difference and I'll get the birth that I want this time. And my birth with my second son ended up being, I went into labour on Black Saturday, which was, I was 42.
Which, if you're not in Australia, means what?
Oh, yeah. So we had a terrible fire here in 2009 in February. Lots of lives and houses were lost. It was a pretty horrible event. And it had been after some very, very hot days. So I think the day that I went into labour, it was 45 degrees, which is, it's very rare we have a day that hot here in Melbourne. And we had no air conditioning, and planning a home birth, it was quite unbearable. And I actually wasn't aware of the fires because obviously we didn't have the TV on or anything at home. We just had our nice music playing, and I was in my own little bubble of birth, and it wasn't until after I'd actually had him 94 hours later and that I was aware of what had happened. But
so you're at home and you're in labour. Is it feeling the same as or different to your first birth?
It's feeling that's a good question. I think it's feeling the same because it's that really gentle stop-start, kind of what I now know as pre-labour. And his waters didn't, so my labour did start differently. It started with contractions. It didn't start with the waters breaking this time. So that was different. But yeah, I was 42 plus 3 when that happened. So I kind of had already gone way beyond what, the hospital system would have allowed me, especially attempting a VBAC.
What do you think about that? What do you think about the whole 40 weeks, 41 weeks, 42 weeks, 43 weeks? What do you think about, or just that?
Well, for me, I think it's different for every woman, but for me now in hindsight with this particular birth, I was definitely holding on and there was definitely fear there for me. Yeah, and I don't think I was acknowledging it. I was very fearful of what if the same thing happens? What if I end up with another cesarean? So I think I was still really naive, but just in a different way, in that I think that I thought that I'd read all the right books and watched all the right movies and made all the right choices, that I'd ticked those boxes this time and that would equal a good birth.
So what happened with his birth?
So I laboured on and off for 4 days. I'd have a night of minute-long contractions coming every 2 minutes and thinking, wow, this is like the peak of labour. And then all of a sudden the sun would come up and they would go away. And then sometime in the afternoon they'd start to come back again, and then it would be even more intense and I'd be like, yep, this is it now. And then it would back off and stop. And then it was just start, stop and all over the place. And then on the 4th morning, I'd actually finally gotten in the birth pool because contractions got to the point where they were coming pretty hard and fast and they were feeling very intense. And then all of a sudden they stopped for 15 minutes and I didn't have one contraction. And then the next contraction I felt a pushing urge. And it took me quite by surprise. And I remember the look on my midwife's face when I was like, oh, I feel like I need to push. And I remember the look on her face she thought that could be the case as well. So I stayed in the birth pool and I didn't really push too much, but I just went with the pushy feeling for about half an hour. And I don't know what it was about me, whether it was the noise I was making or the position of my body, but my midwife started looking concerned and she asked me to hop out and she said, look, I just want to check where you're at, if you're okay with that, because I just want to make sure that you are ready to push. So I had one internal prior to that, I think, and I'd been 2 centimetres. But I think that might have been 2 days previous. So I'm thinking surely we're at 10 by now. So anyway, I went to the bedroom and she did another internal and I was 6 centimetres and extremely swollen, completely swollen cervix, which I should mention too, when I had my first cesarean with my first son, they told me that my cervix was completely swollen.
What do you make of that?
I now know what it is. Yeah. I'll tell you after I tell you. Yeah, I'll tell you at the end. I'll keep that as a little treasure. So I was really disheartened to know that I still was quite far away from being ready to have a baby.
That must have been heartbreaking because in my head, I'm thinking if I was with you there, I'd be going, yes, we're here, right? And you're going, this is my baby. I'm about to meet my baby. And then only to find out you are so far from meeting your baby. Like that must have just been crushing.
Yeah. Well, I just felt in a bind then because I was like, how do I unswell my cervix if I'm pushing against it with every contraction? So I was trying not to push, but by trying not to push, I had to clench and every muscle and cell in my body when I had a contraction, which was making it even more painful. And I was getting quite distressed. It had still been very hot and I think I'd stopped eating food and I'd stopped drinking much water and it was going downhill fast. And so my midwife had sort of said to me, look, we'll keep going for a few more hours, but if there's not a lot of progress, I think we're going to need to either break your waters and really see if we can change this up and get this on the road, or we're going to need to transfer to hospital. So I tried to sleep and relax, and I tried to ignore the pushing urge with my contractions for probably another 4 to 6 hours.
God, that sounds hard.
That is massive.
Yeah, it was pretty intense. And then she checked me and I was still 6 centimetres and swollen. Wow. And I just at that moment I knew. And she offered to break my waters. And I'd actually promised my baby before I even went into labour that I wasn't going to interfere with the process. I felt like if my waters were meant to break, they would. And I don't know why, I just didn't want to interfere. And I was also feeling very done. And so I made the decision to transfer to hospital. And so we drove all the way into the women's because at that time the women's were the only hospital taking home birth backup. We live out in the hills in the Dandenong Ranges, so it's about an hour drive. And we got there just before midnight and I just said to them, I'm done. I need to meet my baby now. And they said, oh, well, if you're tired, there's something we can give you for that and we can keep going. And my instinct was, no, I just know no matter what I have now, it's going to end in a Caesar anyway. So let's just do it now rather than 10 hours time. And I looked at my midwife and I said, do you think I'm being silly or making the wrong decision? And she said, no. She said, if this is your intuition, you follow it. So I actually called at that time and I said, no, I want a cesarean. And I made peace with that. I made peace with it in the car ride on the way in, I think. It was very different going in knowing that's what we were going for, knowing we were going for assistance. And I'd also actually written them a letter in my birth preparation just in case that did happen. And I just sort of worded it saying that you know, if I'm here and you're seeing me, that this is what's happened and this is what I've come for, and I need you to know that this is not what I wanted and I'm heartbroken, and I need this to be peaceful and healing and nurturing, and this is what I want. And I want X, Y, Z. I want minimal talking unless it's about the process. I want you to explain to me what you're doing. I want you to tell me before you show me my baby that you're about to show me my baby so I can prepare myself. And, you know, I explained in the letter that I'd not had a great experience last time. I said under no circumstances is my baby to be removed from me. I want skin to skin. I want to be able to initiate breastfeeding in theatre or in recovery, whenever's quickest. And they were beautiful, and they pretty much honoured everything in my letter that I'd written them. And I think that it was just the way that I worded it, because it was just so heartfelt, that they were just so gorgeous with me. They really I don't know if I lucked out and got a great team or what it was, but they were just really, really nurturing, and it was exactly what I needed. And it was such a different experience that time, because I consciously chose to make it beautiful, and I felt supported and nurtured, and I felt like it was my choice. I wasn't pushed into it. And then my midwife, interestingly, came back to the hospital the next day to see me, and we walked down. It was the first time I got up out of bed after the Caesar, and we went down to the cafeteria just to get a drink or have some space. And she said to me, do you feel like there was anything more you could have done? And I instantly knew straight away. I said, yeah, I could have done the work on myself. All those thoughts and feelings and things inside of me that I think, oh, I don't need to think about that. That's got nothing to do with it, or I don't need to go there. Let's just push that down a little bit further. All that stuff. That's where I didn't go, and that's where I need to go.
It's a pretty quick turnaround for you to get conscious about what has been previously unconscious.
I think that I knew, because it clicked very quickly for me that it was no longer about care provider or setting. It wasn't like, I got that it had nothing to do with the external things for me.
Birth is you.
Yep, that it had to come from within me, not from outside of me. And I knew I hadn't done the work I needed to do. I had a hunch through his pregnancy, but I was still too scared to go there.
Why were you too scared?
I think I was scared of pain and shame and relationship breakdown, dragging things up that I've probably spent the last 10, 15, 20 years pushing away. That just felt really overwhelming to go there, especially when you're an emotional pregnant woman.
So now I'm on the edge of my seat. What work did you do?
So we weren't really planning any more children. And we'd just come back from Thailand, and
I'd met you by this time. We were in circle with Ria by this time.
Yeah.
So you had little baby Reef in the
literally
circle.
3 weeks after I'd had my second son, I started my doula training with you, Jules.
Yeah.
So it was the year 2009 when I did my doula training, and I reckon it would have been around October. And we just got back from Thailand, and my husband and I had a conversation on the couch, because I said to him, I don't actually want another baby right now. Like, I think Reef was only 7 months old, and I very much felt like I hadn't healed from his birth physically, and I was definitely not thinking about having another baby. But I could feel this little soul sitting on my shoulder, and I couldn't, like, as much as I tried to ignore it and tell myself I was being stupid or I was playing mind games with myself, it just got louder and louder and louder, and to the point where I had to say to my husband, look, I know I'm not telling you I want another baby. I'm just letting you know I can feel there's another being there for us at some point. And he said, well, I don't know if I want any more kids. And I said, so are you saying no? And he's saying, no, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying...
I'm just not saying yes either.
I'm just saying, can we just shelve it and talk about it like in a year or two, you know, once we're settled and we've got our head around having two. And I felt fine with that. So I was like, yep, great. And then that weekend was his birthday and we went away for the weekend. And I know my very first sign of pregnancy is I get vertigo. And we went away and I had vertigo all weekend. Oh, and I should also say I was still exclusively breastfeeding my son and I also had a IUD in place.
Oh, God.
So on our way home that weekend, I said to my husband, can we just stop at the chemist on the way home? And he said, what do you want to stop at the chemist for? And I said, I just need to get something. I couldn't even tell him what I was going to get because I thought I'm not even going to tell him that I'm having these thoughts. So I snuck in and grabbed it and hid it in my bag. And then the next morning I did the test when I woke up and I nearly fell off the toilet when it came up with 2 pink lines. I was just like, I don't even understand how this is possible. And I was in so much shock and it must have been written all over my face because I walked out into the lounge room and he was sitting on the couch with our sons and he just looked at me and I didn't even have to tell him. He just went, no. And I went, yep. It was just, wow. Yep. So I was in a little bit of shock. It took me a few weeks to get my head around the fact that I was pregnant again. And I just felt completely confused about what to do because I've got one hand, I'm right in the middle of my doula training and I'm more passionate about natural birth than I've ever been before because I know the most I've ever known. And yet here I am not even healed from my previous second cesarean, and I just think, you know, I know that there's that concern over scar rupture and stuff like that if you haven't had enough time to heal. And just also I think the big thing was I knew what I had to do. I knew what I had to do to have this baby.
And what was that when that landed for you? What was the feeling?
I felt sick. I felt very confronted. And I went and met with a potential midwife who did me the best favour ever. She said to me, I'm not going to take you on until you've gone home and seriously considered having an elective caesarean. And I felt equally as confronted about that because for me, I wasn't giving myself that option. That was almost like I wasn't a possibility for me because I was just being quite hard-headed about the whole thing. So that was such a blessing for me because I agreed to go home and consider it. And I did go home thinking, you know, it's all the judgment that is attached to having, you know, an elective caesarean. I had to let go of all of that and go, you know what, I haven't physically recovered from having had 2 Caesars and who knows whether I'm going to need a third one or not. And I gave myself permission to consider having an elective Caesar, basically, and that wasn't something that I'd ever given myself permission to think of before. And then I sat with that for a few days, and where I got to was that me being the type of woman that I am is that if I had have just gone in for an elective caesarean, it would have eaten away at me for the rest of my life, wondering if I could have, like if I had have tried, would I have done it? And I would have always wondered if I had robbed myself of an experience. And so on that basis, I decided that it wasn't an option for me to choose an elective caesarean, but that if I'm not going to choose that, then I have to choose to do the work. And I have to choose to take full responsibility for my pregnancy, my body, my birth, and I have to show up and give this everything I've got so that if I end up with another caesarean, that I've got no regrets and I've got nothing that I'm coming out of the birth going, I wish I had have done this, I wish I had have done that, I wish I had have said this. Nothing. Like I had to take it on in a way that was terrifying. But for me, that was the only way, because I knew that if I approached this birth like I had the other 2, I knew what the outcome would be.
So what did you do?
So I actually sat down and I got out the good old Rhea Dempsey butcher's paper and some texters. And I just started, I had so many thoughts and ideas and feelings in my head and my body, and I just needed to get them out. So I started to draw and doodle and just write down words, write down things all over this butcher's paper. So feelings that I was having, thoughts that I had in terms of what I needed to do during the pregnancy. And then I realised when I sort of sat back and looked at this big bit of paper that I had there, I realised that nearly everything that I'd written down could be categorised into either emotional, mental, physical or spiritual. And then I went, because I'm such a list person, I went, all right, I'm going to do a list. So I did the 4 headings, emotional, physical, mental, spiritual, and I started writing down all the things that I could do and that I needed to do in those 4 columns. And I ended up with a pretty big list. And I also ended up with lots of things that were in more than one column. And then I turned that list and then I thought, well, that's very clinical. I don't want this list just stuck up next to my bed. Let's make it beautiful. So I then turned it into this gorgeous piece of artwork, which I called my pregnancy map. It was a bit like a mandala, where it was very colourful, and I had, it was sort of broken up into 4 quarters. So one quarter was physical, and I'd have, walking, yoga, swimming, massage, sex, anything physical that I could do to prepare for this pregnancy. And then in the emotional section, I had counselling, communication. So committing to being in communication with people if I had feelings coming up. What else did I have on that list? Journaling. So I was doing some like that free writing where you just write whatever comes out. Crying, giving myself permission to cry. Anything that I felt that was going to nurture, nourish or support my emotional needs through this process, I put on that list. And then I did the same with the spiritual and the same with the mental. And so I can't remember all the things that I did in that pregnancy, but I did a lot. And I remember my husband being very shitty at how much money it was costing us. But
how did you justify that in your mind?
Well, for me, I had to. It was either that or I just go have an elective Caesar. There was no middle ground for me. I don't know.
Was this the first time you'd kind of stepped up in your worth, that you were worth this?
Yeah. Yep.
And was that because you had a really clear definition of where you wanted to go and you'd travelled a journey of where you'd been and you knew the gap there was the worth and that's what you were working on?
I actually feel like my daughter, this baby, came to me to give me the gift of this work. I very much feel like she came to say, do the goddamn work.
Does she still say that to you?
Yeah.
So what happened with her birth? So also, can we just segue here that this is, you're going for a home birth, vaginal birth, after 2 Caesars.
Yeah. So
would that even exist in today's climate?
No. Unfortunately, it would be very rare for a woman to find someone who would be willing to support her to have a home birth after 2 cesareans. I know some women that would free birth and attempt that. For me, that wasn't an option. I very much, especially with my cervix that swells up, and for me, I needed someone there to care for me. I very much needed that nurturing person to take care of me so that I could unravel. But unfortunately, I don't think midwives are able to attend home births anymore for a woman who's had 2 previous cesareans, which is, it's a little bit heartbreaking to know that, what was available to me is no longer available to women. I feel incredibly lucky that I had my daughter when I did, and that I wasn't forced to either go to hospital where I didn't feel supported or free birth at home where I wouldn't have felt supported. So I feel very blessed that that was an option for me, and my heart breaks for women who are faced with that conundrum these days.
So back to Naya's birth.
So after all the work I did in her pregnancy, so I had counselling, I did body work, I was running on a treadmill, I ate really well, I did a lot of writing, and it was a very cathartic process. A lot came up. I had lots of conversations with my husband that were very uncomfortable.
So that's my recollection of that as well, was that you really travelled some big stuff in your relationship doing that journey.
Yeah, it was pretty massive for us and for me, I think.
And you just really stuck to your commitment to showing up.
Yeah. Yep.
How did you do that in the face of what has previously been too scary for you to go to?
It was almost like this thing just came over me, and I don't know what it was, and I don't know if it was my daughter coming through me, but it was almost like I was possessed or like I'd been taken over, and I couldn't do anything other than throw myself 110% into this. I think it was just that mindset, that moment when I decided I couldn't choose an elective cesarean. I also couldn't choose to go through labour like I did again, and that was something, again, my midwife said to me. She said, we're going to do it very different this time. I'm not going to let you labour for 4 days with no progress. We're going to call it earlier than that. She said, I'm going to ask you how long is too long for you to labour, and you're going to make your own time limits. And I actually found great power in that, in putting restrictions on myself so that I'm not just there labouring for 4 days with a swollen cervix and nothing going on, to actually take control. So rather than being a bit of a passenger on the birth train, actually going, no, this is where it's going to go. And if it's not by this stage, by this time, then we're going to intervene.
Which is still being the captain of that train.
Absolutely, because it was my choice, yeah. And I felt like that was empowering me too. So surprisingly, I didn't go too overdue with my daughter. It was only 2 days over her due date.
Isn't that interesting?
Yep. I very clearly remember it was a poignant moment for me in her pregnancy. I was 36 weeks pregnant, and I was walking down the driveway to get the mail, and the wind was blowing through my hair, and I just remember feeling free. And I remember thinking, I had one of those aha moments where I went, do you know what? It doesn't matter how she comes now because I've done the work.
We just want to take a moment to talk to you about our aligned parenting program, which has very much been created from both myself and Bridget, from our hearts and our minds, and our years of parenting wisdom, which is very much built upon a foundation of every conscious parenting book that's ever been written, every in-person experience that could possibly have manifested. Yeah, absolutely. And we realised we still got to this point where we had no understanding or deeper insight beyond our children's needs, and we needed to feel into our own bodies and our own minds and our own sense of desire and want in this world as much as within our relationship. And we didn't know where to go beyond children's needs.
And it's a relationship like no other, that parent-child dynamic. It's not something that just comes naturally if we seek to both raise children with strong emotional intelligence and grow as women and mothers and partners and wives.
So what we've done is opened our aligned parenting program up for lifetime access.
Yeah, so that's $197 in one payment, or you can have it in 3 payments of $66. And what that means is that you get instant access to all of our course material, and you'll also go into our private Facebook group with our tribe and another group where we will facilitate bi-monthly live webinars, and we'll also have facilitation with you after those webinars to hash out any conscious parenting dynamic that you find yourself in and where you want to really upskill.
And that's for lifetime. So we really invite you to jump into aligned parenting programming with us, where we really work on creating deeper insight and greater connection within your world.
I've got it. I got the gift. I've got it already. And now I don't care.
And when you don't care, what you want manifests.
And that was so freeing and beautiful for me to get to that point of not being attached. Not being attached to the outcome. I think I'd attached a lot of worth as a woman to giving birth. if I can't give birth, then I'm a dysfunctional woman, because our sole purpose is to birth babies, right? If I can't even do that, then what does that mean I am? And what does that mean my purpose in this world is? I don't know, like on a very, basic level.
I think there's fairly existential conversations there. I think, like, we even interviewed Natalie Lejeune, and she was saying the same thing in all of her research and body work with women post-Caesar, that there was this real existential feeling about that.
Yep, absolutely. Well, I felt like as a primal mammal, my core reason for existing was dysfunctional. And that just felt very wrong, for want of a better word.
All right, come on, Bree, we're 36 weeks now. What happened?
Anyway, so 2 days past my due date and I woke up with contractions, and it took me by surprise. I was like, nah, this won't be labour. This will just be like...
Was there more power in these contractions than what you'd experienced before?
No, I wouldn't say there was more power in them. They were very gentle, but they were different. They felt like they had a purpose. They weren't... Like, straight off the bat, they were 10 minutes apart. There was none of this one every 30 minutes and then every 5 minutes and then every 10 minutes. They were 10 minutes apart and they were nice. So I just spent the most beautiful day in pre-labour with her. My parents-in-law came and picked up the boys, and Keith and I just spent the day getting the house ready and filling the birth pool and putting up fairy lights and playing my favourite music, and we went out for lunch and then I had a nap. I was just really...
And all through this you've got contractions.
Yeah, I've got contractions coming every 10 minutes, but I'm really focused on staying relaxed and staying in a good headspace, and I'm also focused on fueling myself with good food and drinking a lot of water and prepping my body for what's to come. So I was just needed to get my head in the game. I was breathing and I felt calm. There was not an inch of anxiety or tension in my body, which I don't think I could say for the first two. And then I got to about 7:30 at night and I kind of felt a bit tired, and I was still contracting, but I thought, I reckon I probably could sleep if I tried. So I thought, I'm going to try and sleep now because chances are I'm not going to be able to later. And I went to bed and I did fall asleep, but I woke up at about 9:30 with a pretty decent contraction, and I went, I can't be laying down anymore. I need to get up. So I got up and I just sort of planted myself face down into a beanbag out in the lounge room, and Keith put a movie on for me, which I don't even remember watching. And I really remember at this point going off in my head somewhere. And then I got a fright because I heard a knock at the door, and I knew it was really late. I didn't know what the time was, but I knew it was really late. It had been dark for hours. And I sort of jumped a little bit and I looked at my husband, and we had messaged my midwife to let her know something was going on, but we hadn't told her we needed her yet. But it was my midwife at the door, and she came in and she said, I just felt like you needed me. And I don't want you to feel like you're alone this time. And I don't want you to labour all night on your own and for this to not go anywhere by the morning. So I just thought I'd come. And it was exactly what I needed, yet I'd told her I didn't need her to come. So I'm so glad that she picked up on that and followed her own intuition. Because as soon as she arrived, I think labour kicked up so many notches, it wasn't funny. She checked me, but only because I asked her to, and she even said to me before she checked me, she said, how many centimetres do you feel you are? And I checked in with my body, and I said to her, I feel like I'm about 2. She goes, okay. And so she did the check, and she goes, you're spot on, darling, you're 2. So it wasn't like I'm only 2. It was yes, I'm in tune with my body. And that felt really empowering. So that didn't dishearten me at all. And then she actually took herself off to bed, and she said, you guys are doing amazing. Keep going. If you need me, wake me. Try and just rest, and what you're doing is perfect. So she went to bed, and this was all around 12:30, 1 a.m. And then at 2:30 a.m. I got up to go to the toilet, and while I was on the toilet I got that pushing urge again that I had with my second labour. But it's not a good, like, now that I know the difference, it's not a good pushing urge. I know this sounds terrible, but it's the only way I can describe it. It feels like your vagina's vomiting. And it just didn't feel right, and I knew something was wrong straight away. And in my head I just went, oh, here we go again. And I just knew my cervix was swollen again. And so I called out to my husband and I said, can you please wake Fiona? I need her. And he got her to come in. And I said to her, I've got the pushing urge, but something's wrong. I know it's too early. I'm worried I'm swollen again. So she said, all right, darling. She said, well, hop off the toilet and I'll check you and we'll see what's going on. So she checked me and I was right. I was swollen and I was 4 centimetres. And I gave up a little bit in my head at that point, thinking, well, why don't you just put me in the car now? Let's just transfer now. Let's not waste any more time. Let's just go. And she said, listen, we've come to a fork in the road. And she said, we can actually do things here. We don't just have to give up and go to hospital. She said, I could break your waters and we could see if that makes a difference by getting that head right down on the cervix. Or, we could try a few other things. And I was like, all right, okay, let's break my waters, let's do it. And I needed to pee again, so I went back to the toilet. And she said, I'll just go get my hook out of my bag, have that next contraction on the toilet, and then come out and we'll do it. So I had the next contraction on the toilet, my waters broke. And again, I felt like it was just that's what brought me back to trusting. So I'd been thrown a little bit by getting that pushing urge and really got sent into a bit of a spin in my head with that. But then when my waters broke, then I just went, okay, baby, I trust you. You know what's going on. So I just came back into that and I just called out to my midwife, my waters just broke. So that was amazing. And I got off the toilet and I went out, and the next hour or two were incredibly hard. So contractions were then coming hard and fast. I can't even remember how often, but they felt like they were rolling on top of each other. And I couldn't stop the pushing urge, and I was starting to get a little bit distressed because I knew I shouldn't be pushing because it would swell the cervix even more. And luckily, Fiona realised that I was starting to get a bit distressed, and so she called Rhea, who was my doula, to come. And Rhea arrived, and between Rhea and Fiona, my goodness, what a team. Rhea had me doing this ha ha hoo breathing.
Fucking hate that, bro.
It was the only thing that could stop me from pushing, though.
I 100% believe it, but I remember how hard that is.
Yep. So I was doing this breathing while I was contracting to try and stop me from pushing, and Fiona put ice on my cervix.
How was that as an experience?
I actually didn't feel too much. I didn't.
The swelling could have been big enough that you wouldn't feel it anyway.
Yeah, I was expecting it to feel completely weird, but it didn't. And I don't know if it had half melted by the time it got up there anyway. But anyway, and she gave me some homeopathics, some Nux vomica. And
why Nux vom?
For swelling, I think.
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure.
It's interesting when you describe it as a vomiting vagina that she gives you.
Yeah.
I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
And it's also interesting too because given my constitution, I'm a green miasm. So I don't know if you know much about miasms, but that is Nux vomica is the remedy for green miasms as well. So I react specifically well to Nux vomica, but she didn't know that. So it's just amazing that was the remedy that was picked out of all the thousands of remedies. And the next thing I know, I felt like somebody had put a crowbar inside of my pelvis and was trying to jimmy my pelvis open. And I felt like my insides were coming out of my bum, and it didn't feel good, and it felt like something was very, very wrong. And I remember looking at so in my head I'm thinking, this isn't happening. Why aren't they taking me to the hospital? I was a bit confused. I was like, why aren't they taking me in the back of the station wagon down Eastlink right now? And I felt a bit confused to why they had more faith in me than I did. And I remember looking really confused and looking at Fiona and Rhea and going, can somebody do something about my bum? It's like I feel like my insides are coming out of my bum. And I remember them just smiling and looking at each other. And I was like, what are you smiling at? And then one of them saying, darling, that's just your baby coming down. And then literally Fiona just shone the torch in between my legs, and I just hear her say, bloody Nora, we've got head on view. But I still didn't register. I still was like, that's not a head, that's my insides coming out of me. Why isn't anyone listening to me? Something is wrong and you need to be taking me to hospital right now. And I even saw Fiona kiss my husband on the forehead and say she's going to do it. And I still didn't register. And I think Rhea realised that it wasn't computing in my brain. And Rhea looked me in the eyes and she said, Bree, with that next contraction, you can go with that pushing feeling. And the penny dropped. And I just said, really? And as soon as I said that, a contraction came on. And I didn't even have to push. I just didn't hold back. And my baby just shot out of me in one go. And I remember my head was back and my eyes were closed. And I just felt, so I didn't see myself giving birth. It was just a physical experience of, I felt like this being just came right down through my body, like this soul just did this sweeping feeling right through my whole body. And then I remember hearing Rhea's voice saying, there's your baby, Bree, pick up your baby. And I just opened my eyes and looked in the pool and saw this thing in the pool. And I just was a little bit, oh my gosh, what just happened? And I picked her up and brought her to my chest, and I think I was in a little bit of shock. It certainly took me a good few moments to actually realise that I'd given birth and that it had happened. And then Keith came and hopped in the birthing pool with me. And he was sitting next to me, and I said to him, should we check what we've had? And I remember initially looking down. It was very dark. She was born just before sunrise. And I looked down and looked in between her legs, and I thought I saw a penis. I was like, oh, I think it's a boy, another boy. And then I realised it was the umbilical cord. And then I was like, oh my God, it's a little girl. And it was a pretty special moment. Words can't describe that moment. I just felt like time stood still. And then all the kookaburras started singing on my balcony.
You and the kookaburra.
Yeah.
What are they the totem animal of?
The completion of family and healing of old wounds.
Wow.
And the ability to laugh at oneself, obviously.
So what is the swollen cervix?
So it wasn't till my daughter was, maybe almost one, until I actually connected all the dots. And I'd been to Seven Sisters Festival and I did a clay yoni making workshop. And the woman running it also, we did some yoga in the workshop as well. And she was sharing how she had healed cervical cancer through meditation and yoga. And I was so inspired by her story. And then at the end of the story, she shared that for her, she felt like her cervical cancer was linked to having 3 terminations. And the penny just dropped for me. I had actually had 3 terminations before my children as well, and I just suddenly went, my cervix was saying, fuck off, don't touch me. It had been tampered with, it had been disrespected. It had had someone's energy in it, touching it, that it didn't want. It was hurt and it was grieving. And it stopped trusting me. And it's defensive and it swelled. And so for me, that was kind of the missing piece, as to, look, who knows?
It was the layer of wisdom you received at the time.
Yep. I think as I've gone along, my daughter is now almost 8, and I'm still getting things, with every birth I attend, with every woman I share this journey with. Every time I share her story, there's more wisdom there. It keeps unraveling, and I think it always will. And that's what I love about birth stories, is there's gifts and there's life lessons and there's learnings in them that, the more you share them and contemplate them and stuff, the deeper you can dig and the more wisdom and growth you can get out of them.
It's the crone's journey, though, isn't it? Like, you seek the crone out when you're on the verge of life and death. And birth is both those journeys.
Yeah.
And so you call in your crone, and I just think you, as a doula, are that soul that, is the keeper of that wisdom. You are the old woman who is on the outskirts of the village, who people seek out in those times of life and death, literally to connect with their own crone, their own inner guidance and wisdom. And I think it's a really sacred journey that you take women on. I really do.
Thank you.
I always trouble coming out of birth stories.
Yeah.
Bridge, is there anything you want to ask Bree at this point?
I just think your story so beautifully illustrates the depth of inner work that birth asks us to go to in order to show up. And I still, like 2 births in, still know that there's places I was too scared to go, which is why I ended up having home birth transfer and why I created, in inverted commas, preeclampsia. I have no doubt that there's areas of myself that I was too afraid to go to.
Did you really resonate with that aspect of Bree's story?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
What part did that speak to within you?
Oh, I know that, like, even though I was doing all of the watching videos and really resourcing myself effectively, I was also incredibly busy, like almost too busy to really give space to what I know were the fears that were coming up in me. And I was probably intellectualizing those fears instead of plunging into the pain of those fears and working through them.
Yeah.
And that is the place to go.
Yeah.
I think, to find the alignment and find the congruence that you clearly found in so many moments of your daughter's birth.
How do you do that with women, Bree? Because you have, I think you attract women that are on a journey of self-awakening, and like Bridget, they come to you and there's this analytical mind that's delving into story around birth. How do you bring them into their body space to dissolve, so to speak?
I think it's different for every woman that I work with, because I have to find my way in with each one. And I think each one's a little bit different, but I think just sharing my own journey is sometimes enough to plant that seed with women. And I very much, when I work with women, come from that spiritual, emotional, physical, mental, and I present all 4 of those options to approach birth from. And I encourage them to think for themselves around, well, what is my birth map, or what is my story here? What do I need to work on? So I can plant the seed. It's that old story of you can lead a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. So I very much plant the seed in a loving and gentle way. And at the end of the day, it's her journey and it's her story, and there's no right or wrong, or there's no, I think now, because of my births and being on the other side of them and seeing the gift in it and the wisdom I've gotten from my birth stories, I see the beauty in all birth now, because, I see the beauty in a birth that goes completely to plan. I love seeing birth unfold in the textbook way, and the woman, completely ecstatic. But I also love seeing a woman who's been challenged and gifted something from her baby to work on to become the mother that baby needs. And I know it takes a lot to get your head to the point of seeing something that you've endured or have framed as traumatic or less than desired as a gift. And it certainly took me a very long time to get to that point. So I don't want that comment to be taken lightly. I know some women can feel deep offence around, you know, that, well, you get the birth you need kind of thing. And some people say, fuck you, I don't need, you know, I don't need a bad birth for growth. Of course you don't, but there is growth in a bad birth. If you want it, you know, and you can choose to go there or you can choose not to. But
so with all of your wisdom, if we come back to our topic of the secret to a good birth, and when we talk about how we ended this conversation on expectations, do you think there's a way to have any control over your birth or how you feel about your birth?
absolutely. There's a way to control things, but then there's also, it's like the front and the back of the hand. You can control some things, but then there are other things that you have to completely let go of. So you can control things like choosing your care providers really well. You know, I can't tell you how often I see on forums and pages on Facebook, local pages, oh, I'm pregnant. Has anyone got any recommendations for a good obstetrician? And then the lists and the recommendations just roll in of names of obstetricians. And I'm like, well, define good. What's a good obstetrician? And then lo and behold, it turns out that, you know, 80% of these women that are recommending their good obstetrician, they've had a cesarean. But he was nice and he was lovely and he was very caring. But the woman's ended up with interventions that she didn't really want. So
I love that as a point of what is good, define good. Because you can't just say to another person who's a good provider because you have different versions of good.
Yeah,
exactly.
What are you looking for?
Yeah.
Do you want someone who's going to line up the drugs for you and, you know, tell you that these are your options and you can go, or do you want someone who's going to support natural birth?
Exactly. So it all comes back to what you want and what your expectations of birth is. So first of all, you really need to get clear, what do you want? And why do you want that? Do you want that because that's all you believe is available to you? Like, do you want the epidural because you feel like you can't labour without it? What's that about? You know, where's your power? Where's your strength? And I'm not saying that a good birth is one without an epidural. I've seen many great births with women that have had epidurals because...
But it's been a choice in their power.
It's been a choice.
Versus a choice being underpowered.
That's the big difference, I think, isn't it? So empowered birth can look like any kind of birth.
Yeah.
When it's come from a place of knowledge, of choice.
Yep. Acceptance and surrender. Yeah.
What does surrender mean, Bree?
Well, I think that is not surrendering to what someone else is suggesting for you, but surrendering to your own expectations or surrendering to a part of yourself that wanted it another way. Does that make sense?
No, can you open that up a bit more? I mean, what does surrender mean for you when you're saying that surrender?
Well, I guess, you know, if I look back at, 36 weeks walking down the driveway and that moment of it actually doesn't matter how I give birth to my baby now, I guess I'm tapping into that kind of surrender of...
Do you think that surrender only comes, though, through being able to balance? There's drawbacks and benefits to whichever side my birth falls on here.
Yeah.
Do you think that's when you get to that place in the middle where you go, it literally doesn't matter and I'm safe either way?
Possibly. I don't know. I'm wondering if this is possibly like that good word, you know, surrender is probably something different for different women.
Tell me about that.
Well, because for me, that surrender on that day was more around seeing the gift of having done the work as the whole point, and that how she was then born didn't matter. So I'd surrendered into feeling attached to how my birth unfolded with her. Yeah, I don't know.
What do you think about that, Bridget? Too many bees.
I think about that in the context of, I suppose, as you're saying that, my story being in hospital preparing to be induced with Sylvie. And I think that even in that place of being somewhat guided and somewhat, pushed, like my midwife really didn't give me any other option, nor did the hospital. And nor did I push, right? Nor did I advocate and go, oh, do I really have to do this? Like, I really actively chose to surrender to what I was now being presented with.
Yep.
And find the way to make it beautiful and make it powerful, still on my terms. So I think sometimes even in the moments where it won't feel like it's our choice. There are still ways to surrender to what is, so that you can go there with greater faith.
Which is a choice in the end anyway, because you're choosing how you feel about a circumstance versus it being the circumstance's fault.
Yes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think for me that it's not how you birth, it's how you feel about your birth that will stick with you.
Do you think it makes a difference how you feel about your birth to how you mother?
Yes, I do. Yeah, absolutely.
What do you see there?
I think that, if you come out of birth feeling like your confidence has been rocked, like me the first time, or feeling like your body's failed you, or it can really have a bit of a flow-on effect. And I specifically can definitely link this to my own story with the then struggling with breastfeeding for 4 months. And I have seen that happen in many clients too that have had, a birth that they weren't hoping for. They've then struggled with breastfeeding and struggled with sleeping and struggled with this and struggled with that. And it tends to be a bit of a flow-on effect of struggle. And it's like something's been activated or triggered until something happens at some point and you get back on track. I don't know. But yeah, definitely I can see the ripple effects of...
I have one other question for you, being a birth photographer. I would say it's a relatively, not that it's a new thing to do, but it's become more vogue in the recent years. Would you say that's true?
Yeah, absolutely.
I still have women who say they see my birth pictures and they see Bridget's birth pictures. I've had women walk up to me randomly, but I can't even, like,
really?
I've met, a kid's sport or something like that. Literally, this happened to me. The coach I was coaching against, my girls with on the other team, walked up to me and she goes, I just have to tell you, I know you're not Bridget, but I saw Bridget's photo. You know, that one photo, that ecstatic photo.
Yeah.
And she said, I had that photo in my mind, and it was all I could think about in my third birth when the going got tough and I thought I was going to have an out. I was going to take the epidural and get the fuck out of here. And she said, all I saw in my mind was that photo of Bridget. Oh, and I said to myself, if Bridget can do it, I can do it.
Wow.
And she did it. And so this woman was like coaching with me. We're like having this birth chat as these girls are playing basketball on the court. And I just thought, wow.
That's the ripple,
this is the power of imagery, right? And I don't know about you, Bridget, I'd love to hear from you, but I look at my photos that you took with my fourth with Gwen, and I am just transported to those moments emotionally and spiritually and physically, that you kind of over the years, if you don't have those direct photos, they vague out and you kind of almost don't remember the exquisiteness of them.
Yeah.
And yet I have women who say to me, oh, no, my husband doesn't think that's a good idea. Oh, no, we think they'll be in the way. Oh, no, my doctor said, why would you?
Yeah.
Well, and also just, but also, but it's interesting though, isn't it? Because these are the conversations women are having. Or this part of, look, I want it, but I'm not really willing to pay that much for it. Or why would you? I just would really love to hear your version of why.
Why would you have birth photography? Oh my gosh. It's the day you meet your child. Like, it's the first time you lay eyes on each other and you meet this little soul. It's the most memorable day of your life. Far greater than your wedding day. Far greater than your 21st. And we, as a society, we have those moments captured. Why would we not have the very first meeting of our baby captured? I think there's misconception. I think a lot of people think that birth photography is like crowning shots and camera between the legs and all of that. And it's, sure, sometimes it can be if that particular client wants, emergence photos. But I find probably 80% of the time I'm mainly capturing the woman labouring, and I'm capturing what I love is showing the woman her photos after her labour and hearing all the things she says, like, I don't even remember that. I don't remember doing that. Gosh, I don't remember being in that room. I don't remember this. I don't remember that. And it highlights to me just how much we miss and we forget from our births, because what happens to a woman in birth is she goes back into her primal brain. So her thinking, her frontal lobe or her thinking brain shuts down and she goes back into her primal brain. So she's really not present. She's not in the room. She's not engaging in conversation. She's not aware of time. So hours can slip by and she's not even aware. It's almost like you're in a dreamlike state. And I think too, I love that saying, is it Ina May Gaskin who says if a woman doesn't look like a goddess in birth, someone isn't treating her right? Oh, man. And I see the goddess in the women when they are labouring, and I just like the beauty that is just oozing out of them.
I see that in your photos.
Oh, I just have so much reverence. Yep, thanks. I love that word.
It's just the full spectrum of the feminine. Like just the enormous richness and depth.
Yeah.
The other thing I really notice in your photos is they capture a lot of relationship. You seem to capture the feeling versus the physical experience, if you like. Yeah. The feeling experience of
one of your most beautiful, there's an incredible picture that you captured of Jules and Nick, and there's also a really beautiful one that I love that you got of Mark Snow, where he's standing just behind me with his hand on his heart, like watching me on the ball. And it's just, it's almost like these men witnessing us in our power and us in our deep connection with ourselves and just the role that we're playing orbiting each other through that bringing of new life.
And how does that make you feel to know that secretly behind your back that's how your husband feels about you?
It's just beautiful.
I just feel so honoured to be able to witness those moments that you can't see, and I love to show women how gorgeous and powerful and strong and capable they are, and I think that's a beautiful way to go into motherhood. And I just I don't know. I have immense grief around not having any of my births photographed, to be honest. So
I do with my first three as well.
Yeah.
I regret that.
Yeah. I have got one photo of me holding my daughter in the birth pool after she was born that I absolutely adore, but that's about all I've got. Yeah.
So, Bree, we need to wrap up, but before we do, is there anything left unsaid for you that you would like to leave these beautiful conscious women listening, many of you whom are pregnant or on the path of pregnancy and birth at the moment? No one holds space like you. There is not a doula in this world I would recommend other than you, because I have witnessed you hold space in such, an incredible, doesn't feel earthly, kind of angelic way. I don't know. There's something magic about what you do. And I know that magic comes from wisdom. I'm wondering what it is that you would like to leave these women with.
Wow. I think intuition is the word that's coming to me, and that was my biggest gift in my third labour and pregnancy, was I really tapped into my intuition. And I feel like as a society that's something we have lost touch of a lot. And if we can use birth as a bit of a ship to get back there and to gain it back, and then, you know, getting back in touch with your intuition, man, that just sets you up so powerfully for motherhood. You know, all those nights when you don't know what you're doing and you don't know what's wrong, and if your intuition's switched on, it just makes everything so much easier. And having intuition in making choices around your birth, and intuition in your labour, and having a voice to honour that intuition, saying, I'm feeling this is what I want to do, or I'm not feeling that doesn't feel right for me. And I know that can be quite a confronting and scary thing for some women, but for me, honestly, I think that is the secret to a good birth.
How do we get in contact with you, Bree?
So I have a website which is breedownes.com.au.
Can you spell it out for us?
I can. It's BREEDOWNES.com.au.
We'll put that link in our show notes anyway.
Thanks, darling. I also have an Instagram account which is Bree Downes Doula Photographer, and I'm also on Facebook.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and your heart and your story with us. Gosh, we respect story because, gee whiz. So we hope that you enjoyed our interview with Bree Downes, and we'd love to remind you to check out Aligned Parenting at nourishingthemother.com.au/online programs. Please continue to follow us on Nourishing the Mother on Facebook and Instagram. You can connect with Bridget at suburbansandcastles.com and myself at thepleasurenutritionist.com. And remember, you've got to nourish the mother to rock the family, and we'll see you next week when we continue to peel back the layers on your mothering journey.
This has been a production of TheWellnessCouch.com. Check us out on Facebook and join in the conversation on Facebook.com/The Wellness Couch. Subscribe to each show on iTunes and check us out on Twitter. The Wellness Couch, streaming wellness into your lives.
Whilst the Wellness Couch presenter endeavor to provide accurate and helpful information to their listeners, these podcasts cannot take into account individual circumstances and are not intended to be a substitute for health and medical advice from a qualified health professional. You should always seek the advice of a qualified health professional before acting on any of the information provided by any of the Wellness Couch podcasts.